What if the greatest moment of your life came on an ordinary day, in the middle of nowhere, with everything seemingly going wrong? In this video, you'll discover what really happened in the encounter between Moses and God, beyond the version you've heard before. We'll go beyond the miracle of the burning bush. We'll talk about fear, purpose, inner confrontation, and identity transformation. Using powerful principles from Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, you will understand how this moment changed not only Moses' life, but the course of history, and how you can apply this today to overcome fear, discover your calling, and finally act with courage. If you've ever doubted yourself, if you've ever felt small in the face of a huge challenge, this video is for you. In the scorching silence of the desert, where the dust of time hides the footprints of the forgotten, Moses walked with his cattle towards Mount Horeb. It was just another day, seemingly ordinary, but as in the great moments of life, the transformation announced itself subtly before exploding into revelation. There, among the dry bushes and the cutting heat, the unusual appeared, a burning bush that was not consumed. It was the impossible before the eyes of the skeptic. At that moment, reality broke, and the logic of the natural world gave way to the supernatural. Moses, a man shaped by two worlds, the palace and the pasture, was called by name twice. There was no longer any way to ignore it. The fire did not burn the plant, but consumed the soul of whoever saw it. A call always begins with uneasiness. The one who had once been a prince of Egypt was now a wandering shepherd. But God, knowing Moses' cultural language, spoke to him through familiar symbols. Taking off one's shoes was an act of reverence learned in Egypt before the gods. God did not simply call Moses, he prepared the message so that it would be understood. This is one of Hill's central lessons. Communicating with the subconscious must be done in a language it recognizes. The fire, the call, the repeated name, the act of taking off one's shoes, all of this was not a spiritual accident, but a divine strategy. This is how a sleeping leader is awakened. Moses, however, responded with fear. The same fear that Hill describes as the greatest enemy of success. Fear of criticism, of failure, of responsibility, fear of not being enough. God was offering a mission, but Moses saw a sentence. The battle was not with Pharaoh, but within. Moses was struggling with God, trying to negotiate his escape, as if insecurity could justify giving up. How many leaders hide behind sophisticated excuses? I'm slow of speech, they won't believe me, who am I? Moses' excuses are the same ones that echo in the mind of anyone faced with a great challenge. Hill teaches that burning desire, when aligned with faith and action, breaks through the barriers of doubt. But there, in that moment, Moses' desire was stifled by the weight of past shame and the fear of future failure. God then begins a healing process. He shows that the staff Moses was holding, a symbol of his current identity, could transform itself, turn into a serpent, and then return to its original state. Everything Moses was, or thought he was, could be redefined. Take the serpent by the tail, God said. This simple order required more than courage. It was an exercise in faith, facing fear head-on, not from the head, the most obvious and controllable place, but from the dangerous, unpredictable end. This is exactly what Hill calls decisive action. When we act even without all the guarantees, we create a new mental pattern. By obeying, Moses broke a cycle of avoidance that had lasted 40 years. He stopped running from his past, from the Egyptians, from his guilt, from his destiny. He began to see that the strength did not come from him, but from the purpose that now burned within him. Like that bush, the fire that did not consume the bush was the symbol of the mission that is not extinguished by the winds of doubt, because it burns with the flame of the calling. This is the kind of defined focus that transforms ordinary men into spiritual and historical giants. Finally, the mission did not come alone. God offers partnership. Aaron will be its mouth, he will be its heart. This reveals another key from Hill: the power of a mastermind, an alliance of two or more minds working in harmony for a greater purpose. Moses did not have to be perfect, just willing. The hero is not born ready. He builds himself by facing fear, with support and direction. When he finally accepts the calling, Moses is not the same man who saw the bush. He is now an instrument. The one who was a prince and then a shepherd becomes a liberator. All because, on a seemingly ordinary day, he decided to listen to the voice that spoke from within the fire. and he understood that the impossible is only impossible until someone, even with fear, says, "Here I am." Moses was chosen not at the height of his strength, but at the quietest point of his journey. This reveals the first great principle hidden in the burning bush, the power of invisible preparation. Hill teaches that no external achievement is possible without a firm internal structure, and it is in the isolation of the desert, away from the noise of the world, that true leadership mindsets are honed. Moses lived for 40 years among the rocks, away from the limelight and the palace. Contrary to the common belief that success depends on constant exposure, lasting success is built in the dark. God waited for the time of maturity. The fire in the bush not only called, but revealed. It was a metaphor for the spirit, burning, strong, constant, but not consuming what it touches. Moses saw a plant on fire, but what was really burning was the calling that had always existed within him. Buried under years of fear and disappointment, a man's second birth begins when he recognizes the inner fire that the world cannot quench. The voice that called him did not simply say, "Go," but first said, "Moses, Moses." Calling by name reveals a deep understanding of identities, something that Hill correlates with self-knowledge as the starting point for any achievement. Before giving orders, God confirms the individuality of the leader. It is impossible to lead a people if you do not know who you are. Moses carried an internal conflict, Egyptian by creation, Hebrew by blood, outlaw by action, foreigner by condition. He was a divided man. The repetition of the name is more than emphasis, it is reconstruction. It is as if the deity is saying, "I know who you are, even if you have forgotten." This refers to Napoleon Hill's principle of faith, the inner certainty that there is a greater purpose. Even when external logic calls us failure, faith begins with a reappropriation of identity. Moses needed to relearn who he was in order to discover what he should do. When God tells Moses to take off his sandals, he is saying, "Abandon the concepts you have brought here. The ground is now different. It is sacred, but also symbolic." The sandals represented the previous path, the Egyptian culture, the excuses, the escapes. It is necessary to strip away the old mental structure in order to enter the new mission. Hill speaks of this as autosuggestion, the act of replacing limiting patterns with empowering affirmations. Moses still carried the narrative of fear, failure, and punishment. By taking off his shoes, he connects with the new ground, firm, divine, reprogramming. Every step from then on would be barefoot, that is, more sensitive, more aware, more present. This is the first step of true transformation, taking off that which protected, but also numbed. There is no divine mission with a worldly mentality, and there is no liberation of a people without first liberating oneself. The clash between Moses and God in the following chapters is not rebellion, it is the therapeutic process of reconstruction. Moses tries to negotiate. "I'm not eloquent, they won't believe. Who am I?" To each objection, God answers clearly and patiently, but also firmly. This demonstrates what Hill calls decisiveness and persistence. Every big dream invites resistance from the old self, and every true calling will face tests before it manifests. God didn't need Moses' perfection, he needed his decisiveness. Moses wanted assurances, as does anyone faced with risk. But true power lies in acting. Without all the answers, the faith of action precedes the miracle. And here is a profound insight. God never removes Moses' limitation, he only adapts the mission so that it can be accomplished even with the limitations. Aaron speaks for him. The staff is a sign of power. Fear remains, but obedience prevails. It is persistence that creates the miracle, not the absence of fear. The moment the staff turns into a serpent is more than a supernatural spectacle. It is the internal dramatization of Moses' conflict. The staff, a symbol of stability, security, and control, transforms into something threatening. It is a portrait of fear when something familiar changes shape. By telling Moses to grab the serpent by the tail, God forces the leader to do the unthinkable, face what he fears most at the point where he has least control. This is a spiritual reprogramming strategy. By obeying, Moses takes the most difficult step and wins. Hill teaches that overcoming the 6 basic fears, poverty, criticism, illness, loss of love, old age, and death, is a prerequisite for all ascension. Moses overcame them all in a single gesture. The fear of criticism, "Who am I?" Of death, "They will kill me." Of incapacity, "I don't know how to speak." He takes a And so, the staff, now a symbol of authority, returns to his hand, but not as a shepherding tool, but as a scepter of liberation. The leader is ready. The world will change because it changed first. Moses' calling does not end at the bush, in fact, it only begins. The real test was not seeing the fire or hearing the voice. It was accepting the duty and bearing the burden of liberating a nation. Hill argues that everything begins with a definite purpose, and Moses's was clear: to free the Hebrew people from slavery. But like all true purpose, it does not come with a paved path, but with real risks. Moses knew this. Returning to Egypt meant returning to the scene of the crime, to the past, to the ghosts. It was as if an entrepreneur were called to reopen a bankrupt company, face the creditors, the mistakes, and still make it an empire. Willpower was not enough. It required a mindset forged in purpose and sustained by faith. Moses had to see himself no longer as the man who had failed, but as one who had been shaped by failure to succeed. This is emotional transmutation, using pain as fuel. Moses' mind underwent a process that Hill describes as rebuilding faith through creative imagination. He had not yet freed anyone, but he had to see himself as a liberator. He had to assume a new self, an inner character that did not exist before, but urgently needed to be incorporated. This ability to see beyond the current evidence is one of the hallmarks of achievers, leaders, and visionaries. Fear said, "You will fail." Faith, built day by day in dialogue with God, said, "You have already won, you just need to obey." That is why God spends so much time with Moses. It is not the plan that is being adjusted, it is the man. When he finally accepts, Moses changes not only geography, but also identity. He ceases to be the stranger of Midian to become God's messenger. Egypt no longer scares him because he has already faced his worst enemy himself. This is where the principle of the mastermind comes in. Moses was not called to act alone. Aaron's presence reveals that great missions require strategic alliances. Aaron's mind complements Moses, his voice, his command of the language, his courage in the face of Pharaoh. Hill argues that any significant achievement requires a coalition of intelligences in harmony. It is not just about having help, but about joining forces with purpose and alignment. Moses had to understand that leadership is not about domination, but about cooperation. The staff was his, but the voice that echoed was Aaron's, and together, they became more than brothers. They became an organism of transformation. This is why so many fail. They try to liberate nations with their own hands. Moses learned that greatness multiplies when the mission is shared, the ego is silenced, and the purpose screams. It is in this environment that the impossible becomes inevitable. As Moses walked back to Egypt, he returned not as a fugitive, but as a messenger. Each step in that direction was a silent declaration that the past no longer defined him. Hill describes this stance as action sustained by burning desire. Moses may have been afraid, but now the desire was stronger. The desire for justice, for liberation, for redemption. It is important to note that God did not promise ease. He only promised presence. The promise was not, "There will be no pain, but I will be with you." And this, according to Hill, is the basis of persistence, not giving up when the going still seems hostile. The mind programmed for purpose resists, while the mind programmed for comfort retreats. Moses was now prepared to lead an entire people on a journey of faith, because he had first crossed the desert of his own soul. And he who crosses the desert with God does not fear the armies of men. What makes this story universally powerful is that Moses' dilemma is the dilemma of all of us. Will we be defined by our limitations or by our calling? Hill teaches that success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. Moses embodies this not because he was born ready, but because he chose to grow. He failed, he ran away, he hesitated, but in the end, he chose to move forward. And that choice is the turning point of the human narrative. The fire in the bush did not consume because it was a symbol of the mission that, even when burning, does not destroy it, only reveals. Anyone who chooses to listen to the voice, to take off their sandals, to face the serpent, and to join others in mission becomes an agent of change. Moses went from being a name in history to becoming the leader of the greatest journey of liberation ever recorded. Not because he was great, but because he allowed himself to be guided by something greater. And in this, each of us finds the invitation to our own journey. When Moses hears God's call and hesitates, we are not facing a spiritual failure, but an absolutely human reaction. Fear paralyzes, even when the voice calling is that of the Creator himself. This fear is not just about Egypt, it is the fear of not being enough, of failing, of exposing oneself. Napoleon Hill explains that this type of fear is not just a feeling, it is a state of mind, fueled by limiting beliefs. Moses had many. I stutter. They won't listen to me. Who am I? This is the inner conversation that destroys leaders before they even begin. The power lies in recognizing fear, naming it, and still acting. Moses did not magically overcome fear, he carried it. But the decision to obey weighed more heavily, and that's what sets doers apart. They're afraid, but they do it anyway. True courage isn't the absence of fear, it's purpose-driven action in spite of it. Which brings us to a crucial point. Moses was only able to accept his mission when he understood that the center of the story wasn't him, but the people who needed him. Hill says that great achievements come when desire is fueled not just by personal gain but by greater impact. Moses' true motivation came when the people's pain overcame his own fear. That's the secret of any leader, shifting the lens from me to we. The power of higher purpose can unlock reserves of energy, focus, and boldness that no individualistic technique can sustain. Moses realized that his life wasn't about him. It was about bridging the gap between captivity and freedom. And that kind of clarity activates what Hill calls the fuel of success, a vision so powerful, so charged with urgency, that it eliminates hesitation and creates movement, even on uncertain terrain. But accepting the mission wasn't all there was to it. Moses had to make himself worthy of it. The process of leadership required self-mastery. In the inner wilderness of his insecurities, he began to master his speech, his posture, his spirit. Hill emphasizes that self-mastery is the foundation of true leadership. It is not about controlling others, but about governing oneself in the face of crises. Moses did not return to Egypt with arrogance, but with authority. And this authority was born of submission to purpose. This reversal of the axis from vanity to service was what made him one of the greatest leaders in history. The same man who killed an Egyptian on impulse would now lead an entire nation with patience, strategy, and focus. Anger gave way to responsibility, escape gave way to mission, and fear gave way to faith. This internal transformation is the true miracle of history. The sea does not part by magic. It parts when the leader changes within. It is at this point in the journey that the symbol of the staff takes on new meaning. Before, it was just a shepherding tool. After the bush, it became an extension of Moses' faith. Hill describes this as the embodiment of creative thinking, when the invisible becomes tangible through a symbol charged with belief and action. The staff that turns into a serpent, touches the Nile, and parts the Red Sea is the same. But what has changed is who holds it. Now it is an instrument of purpose. This reveals an important key. God does not change the resources we have, He changes how we use them. What is ordinary today, in the right hands, becomes extraordinary. Moses learned this, and that is why his legacy is not in miracles, but in the decision to no longer run away, to stand up as a leader, even when everything inside him said run away. He chose to obey, and this decision, repeated every day, is what builds a destiny greater than fear. Ultimately, we understand that Moses' encounter with God was less about seeing a miracle and more about becoming a miracle. Hill talks about the power of the definitive decision, the one that breaks with doubt and creates a new cycle. When Moses decided to go, even though he was afraid, he sealed his identity. Doubt is corrosive when cultivated, but when faced with faith, it becomes conviction. This is the high point of the call, when the leader says, "Here I am," and does not turn back. There is no plan B, there is no excuse, there is only the road of purpose. Moses, in accepting this, did not just become a liberator of the Hebrew people, he became the eternal archetype of every human being who is called to something greater and must decide between comfort and mission. This is the crossing that every leader must make, and as Hill teaches, it all begins with a clear decision, made in faith, fueled by a burning desire, sustained by persistence. Moses decided, and the world changed. After accepting the call, Moses did not become a hero overnight. He still had to return to the place of Egypt and confront the power that made him flee. This stage represents the moment when decision becomes action. Hill calls this disciplined persistence. the ability to keep marching even when the path is full of risks and difficult memories. Moses did not return out of arrogance. He returned for a mission. His mind, once dominated by doubt, was now structured by a plan to confront Pharaoh, to free his people, to lead an entire nation to the promise. It is this kind of clarity that defines true doers, not just knowing what to do, but committing to do it, without backing down. Moses understood it was not about him being enough, but about God being enough through him, and that unlocked his potential. He was no longer a wandering shepherd, he was a channel of God's will. One of the keys Hill emphasizes is that great leaders build an unbreakable mindset before they launch into external battle. Moses was no longer shaped by the voices of the past. He now lived by the conviction of purpose. And when a man aligns himself with a higher calling, he becomes inevitable. This mindset is contagious, which is why the first thing that happens when he meets Aaron is a joining of forces. God joins the pieces of the plan. Aaron will be the voice, Moses will be the presence. This is the practical application of the mastermind principle. To harmonized minds, operating under the same vision, multiply their strength. Moses' faith strengthens Aaron's faith, and vice versa. This shows that leadership is never a solitary act. It is an ecosystem of trust and shared vision. The staff is still in his hand, but now he also carries the support, the backing, the fraternal bond that transforms mission into movement. When leaving Midian, Moses makes a symbolic choice. He says goodbye to anonymity. He leaves his comfort zone, abandons the safe land, renounces the silence that protected him. This gesture is the embodiment of what Hill defines as an inflexible decision towards a defined main objective. There is no more room for turning back. He leaves no room to see what will happen. He goes because he believes. He goes because he was chosen. He goes because he can no longer not go. This is the true state of decision that generates results, when doubt is uprooted and replaced by conscious faith. Moses' faith was no longer abstract. It was concrete, directed, practical. He had a people to liberate, and even though he didn't know every detail, he trusted every step. Because a mind dominated by faith and sustained by purpose doesn't need to see the whole path only. Next step, on the way back, Moses begins to experience something Hill calls a transmutation of emotional energy. The insecurity that had once held him back now turns into zeal, intensity, and direction. This is spiritual power in action. It's the point at which the past stops being a prison and becomes a foundation. Moses was going to the same Egypt he had fled, but now with a different attitude. What had once been a source of shame had become an argument of authority. He knew how the system worked. He knew what the people suffered. He knew how Pharaoh's mind worked. And now, armed with faith, experience, and purpose, he could speak as an equal to the empire. This is one of the great secrets of liberators. The past is not erased, it is transformed. What the world uses to humiliate, God uses to authenticate. The staff that was once a symbol of the routine of shepherding would now be the seal of supernatural signs. Moses did not change his body, but his spirit. Upon reaching the threshold of Egypt, Moses was no longer the same. The inner journey was complete, and this is the point where the story changes phase, from preparation to execution. Here, all of Hill's principles converge. The burning desire is already installed. The purpose is clear. Faith is aligned. Fear has been faced. The strategic alliance with Aaron is established. The leader is ready to confront the system. It is at this point that we understand the journey of the mind is longer than that of the body. The desert that Moses crossed before seeing Pharaoh was invisible, but decisive. Only those who cross their own chaos can lead others to order. And this is the greatest lesson from the initial phase of Moses' mission, that every liberator must first be freed. When this happens, he becomes unstoppable. And the world, sooner or later, bows before a mind driven by purpose, faith, and decision. So, what did you think of Moses' journey so far? If this story impacted you in any way, whether it was reminding you of your own purpose, your fears, or how faith can transform our lives, leave a like. It really helps bring this content to more people who also need to hear this call. Comment below. What part of this journey spoke to you the most? Was it the fire of the bush that did not consume, the fear of going back to the past, or the courage to obey even without all the answers? Subscribe to the channel if you like this type of content that combines history, spirituality, life purpose, and a powerful mind. we bring reflections that go beyond the superficial, and you are part of that. Activate the bell, because in the next episode we will dive into Moses' journey to Egypt and the epic confrontation with Pharaoh. And believe me, there is a lot of stuff there that is useful for our lives today. Share this with someone you know who is living in a desert and needs to hear that the bush is still burning. See you in the next chapter. And remember, the world changes when your mind changes first.